In politics, some issues never really go away. They just keep resurfacing again and again, like a stubborn stain that refuses to be scrubbed out. No matter how many times leaders try to resolve them, they bubble back up, fueled by new headlines, old grievances, and the ever-shifting winds of public opinion. One of those recurring dramas is the U.S. Canada dairy dispute, a saga that has spanned decades, outlasting presidents, prime ministers, and trade deals. In March 2025, former President Trump, never one to shy away from controversy, reignited the old feud. At a rally, he accused Canada of unfairly raising dairy tariffs, claiming American farmers were being cheated and vowing to hit back with tough new measures if things didn't change. But fact-checkers and trade experts quickly pointed out that Canada's tariffs hadn't actually changed in years. The numbers were the same as they'd been since the last round of negotiations. Still, the accusation made headlines, stirring up old tensions and putting dairy back on the front page. The timing couldn't have been more dramatic. The USMCA, the trade agreement that replaced NAFTA, was up for its scheduled review, and suddenly, dairy was once again the hot-button issue everyone was talking about. For American dairy farmers, the Canadian market is a tantalizing opportunity. With 40 million consumers who love their milk, cheese, and yogurt, it's a market just across the border, but largely closed off by Canada's strict import controls and tariffs. For Canadians, though, supply management is about more than just economics. It's a system that protects local farmers, stabilizes prices, and has become a symbol of national pride, defended fiercely by politicians of every stripe from coast to coast. So when Trump threatened retaliation, it wasn't just a trade dispute. It was a challenge to a core Canadian value, sparking protests and passionate debate on both sides of the border. The lines were drawn, America pushing for open markets and more access, Canada standing firm to defend its protected system. Both sides dug in, knowing the world was watching. And so, as the sun rose over the border, the next chapter in this long-running saga was set to unfold, reminding everyone that in politics, some battles are never truly over. Canada's response to Trump's threats was swift and decisive. The government wasted no time in rallying support from all political parties, business leaders, and most importantly, the dairy farmers whose livelihoods were at stake. The sense of urgency was palpable across the country, as news outlets buzzed with debates and town halls filled with concerned citizens. The message was clear: Canada would not be bullied into giving up its cherished dairy protections. In June 2025, Parliament unanimously passed a landmark law making it illegal to negotiate away supply management in any trade deal. This was not just a policy decision, it was a bold, symbolic act of national unity. The law sent a powerful signal to both domestic and international audiences that Canada's dairy sector was off limits, no matter the pressure. This move took dairy off the table before talks even started. It was a preemptive strike, designed to protect Canadian farmers from being used as bargaining chips in high-stakes negotiations. The legislation was airtight, leaving no room for loopholes or backdoor deals. Canadian officials made it clear, supply management was non-negotiable. At press conferences and in interviews, they repeated the same message. The dairy industry was a cornerstone of rural Canada, and its protection was a matter of national pride and economic security. The law was a message to both Trump and Canadian farmers. No deal would sacrifice their interests. For farmers, it was a rare moment of reassurance in an uncertain world. For the U.S., it was a clear warning that Canada would not back down, even if it meant risking a trade war. American trade groups were furious, calling it a protectionist trick. They accused Canada of undermining the spirit of free trade and setting a dangerous precedent for future negotiations. The outrage was immediate and loud, with lobbyists and politicians demanding retaliation. They argued that if countries can shield their industries by law, what's the point of trade agreements? The debate quickly spilled over into international forums, with experts and analysts weighing in on the implications for global commerce. The stakes were suddenly much bigger than just milk and cheese. Canada's hardline set up a fundamental clash: national sovereignty versus free trade. The world watched as two close allies found themselves on opposite sides of a philosophical divide, each defending their own vision of fairness and economic security. The U.S. now faced a partner unwilling and legally unable to budge. Negotiators realized that any hope of prying open Canada's dairy market had vanished overnight. The mood in Washington shifted from confident to combative. The battle lines were drawn, and the stakes had never been higher. What began as a dispute over dairy had escalated into a test of wills between two nations, with the future of North American trade hanging in the balance. The dairy war was officially on, and neither side was backing down. So, what is Canada's supply management system? It's a three-part system: production quotas, guaranteed prices, and strict import controls. Canada limits how much milk farmers produce and guarantees them stable prices. The real controversy: import controls. Tariff rate quotas let in a set amount of U.S. dairy tariff-free, but anything above that faces sky-high tariffs. Ironically, U.S. exporters rarely fill their quota, often using less than half. The U.S. blames Canadian red tape for making it hard to access the market, calling the quotas an illusion. Canada insists the system is fair and that U.S. companies just aren't competing effectively. The real fight isn't about tariffs. It's about how those quotas are managed. That's the heart of the dispute. To understand today's dairy fight, look back to the USMCA, the deal that replaced NAFTA. Trump made renegotiating NAFTA a priority, targeting Canada's supply management. The result? Canada kept its system, but agreed to let in more U.S. dairy through expanded quotas. The tariff structure stayed the same. The U.S. just got more access. Since then, the real battle has been over whether Canada is honoring that access. The U.S. challenged Canada through USMCA's dispute process, winning once, but losing the next round. Canada tweaked its system, but the U.S. said it wasn't enough. Conflicting rulings deepened mistrust, setting the stage for today's high-stakes review. The legal wrangling continues, with both sides feeling shortchanged. The USMCA's durability is now on the line. For American dairy farmers, the dispute isn't just about numbers on a balance sheet. It's personal, and it cuts deep into their daily lives and futures. They face wild price swings and shrinking profits, watching as the market they depend on becomes more unpredictable each year. For many, Canada's stable market seems like a lifeline just out of reach, a neighbor's green pasture they can see, but not access. Some have invested heavily, hoping that new trade deals would open doors to Canadian consumers. Instead, they find themselves tangled in red tape and blocked by what they see as Canadian bureaucracy, feeling their hopes dashed. To these farmers, Canada's supply management system feels like a wall, unfair protectionism that keeps their products out and their businesses struggling. They rally for fair trade, demanding a level playing field. But north of the border, Canadian farmers see things through a different lens. For them, supply management isn't just policy. It's a shield against the chaos that plagues their American counterparts. Their system means stable prices, predictable production, and the confidence to invest in new equipment or pass the farm on to the next generation. It's a sense of security that shapes their entire way of life. Canadian farmers worry that opening the border to cheap U.S. milk would flood their market, driving down prices and threatening the survival of small towns and family farms that have thrived for generations. They argue that the U.S. system relies on government subsidies and overproduction, making it far from a true free market. To them, protecting their system is about fairness, not just self-interest. For Canadian families, defending supply management is about survival, community, and preserving a way of life that's been handed down for decades. Both sides see the other as the aggressor, each convinced they're fighting for what's right and necessary for their families and futures. The divide between American and Canadian dairy farmers runs deep, and with every new dispute, it only seems to grow wider, shaping the future of farming on both sides of the border. Why does milk matter so much in a massive trade relationship? In Canada, dairy farmers are concentrated in Quebec and Ontario, key provinces for winning elections. No party dares cross them. Supporting supply management is political survival. That's why Parliament passed its protectionist law unanimously. In the U.S., dairy states like Wisconsin and New York are election battlegrounds. Politicians win points by fighting for their farmers. Trump especially uses the issue to rally rural voters. The actual economic value of dairy trade is dwarfed by the political stakes. The dispute is less about economics, more about political posturing. Farmers on both sides are caught in a high-stakes game between their leaders. 2025 saw the dairy dispute escalate fast. Trump's March threats put dairy back in the headlines, setting a combative tone for USMCA talks. In June, Canada's parliament passed its law protecting supply management. Prime Minister Carney met with Trump, who threatened to derail broader talks if dairy wasn't resolved. Canada made a strategic concession, canceling a planned digital tax on U.S. tech companies to ease tensions. All this unfolded as the USMCA review loomed, with dairy at the center. Every move was calculated, each side jockeying for advantage. The outcome would shape North American trade for years. The U.S. isn't alone in challenging Canada's dairy system. Countries like New Zealand have launched their own disputes, demanding better access to Canada's market. Cases have reached the World Trade Organization, turning this into a global issue. Canada faces pressure from powerful allies and its own industries, like beef producers, who fear retaliation could hurt them. The dairy lobby remains strong, but cracks are showing as other sectors worry about collateral damage. International consensus is building. Canada's supply management is seen as out of step with modern trade. The government is squeezed between protecting farmers and risking broader trade fallout. The world is watching and pushing for change. Canada's position is more isolated than ever. What's next? The USMCA review could go several ways, none easy. A trade war is the worst-case scenario, tariffs on both sides, higher prices for everyone. More likely drawn-out legal battles over quota administration, with each side seeking technical wins. Canada might offer unrelated concessions, hoping to protect supply management. For Americans, it's about fair market access. For Canadians, it's about protecting farmers and high food prices. Any resolution will have real impacts. Lower prices could hurt Canadian farms, but help consumers. The dispute is a classic clash: national protectionism versus global free markets. The outcome will shape U.S. Canada relations and set a precedent for future trade fights. Whether it ends in war, compromise, or stalemate, one thing's certain: the milk fight isn't over yet.